Another day, another RNC anti-voting lawsuit. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Marc, in the past few weeks, the RNC has filed 3 new lawsuits, 2 in North Carolina, 1 in Michigan. Before we get into the details of these lawsuits, why are Republicans targeting those states?
Because they're swing states, right? We know why they're challenging these states. Why are they filing so many lawsuits in Arizona? Why are they changing the rules of the game for certification in Georgia? Why are they out of their mind nervous that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court may uphold a recent decision to count undated and misdated ballots? Why do they keep attacking voting in Wisconsin? Because these are all swing states, right? Nevada, why do we see the Republicans file lawsuits in Nevada? Because all of these states are the states in which the presidential election are going to be decided. So when you look at Michigan and when you look at North Carolina, you see 2 states that are critical to the path for victory. In Michigan, it is one of the blue wall states, along with Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. That if Kamala Harris wins those 3 states, she's the next president of the United States. You can take that to the bank. And in North Carolina, where all of a sudden Donald Trump is playing defense. And let me tell you this: if Kamala Harris wins North Carolina, it is game, set, match. We're talking about a landslide electoral college victory. And Donald Trump is trying to stave that off in a state that is quickly closing against him.
And it's not just the presidential election in North Carolina. There is a tightly contested governor's race this fall. Michigan has a major Senate race. So it's not just the White House on the line here. It is also Congress. It is also the governor's mansion, Marc. But let's start talking about these North Carolina cases. Republicans have filed 2 of them, both of them having to do with voter registration and the voter rolls.
Yeah, so both were filed in Wake County, which is the county for the seat of government. It's where Raleigh is. And the first one of these claims that there are non-citizens on the voter rolls that need to be removed. They are claiming that the North Carolina State Board of Election has not enforced a rule that has to do with people being called for jury duty, and when they are excused for being not a citizen, they need to be removed from the rolls. The State Board of Elections says the RNC doesn't know what the hell they're talking about and has this wrong. My money is that the State Board of Elections is right, because the RNC usually doesn't know what it's talking about and is wrong. And also, the RNC likes to demagogue on this issue that involves virtually no voters. The second lawsuit actually involves potentially a lot of voters, right? It is challenging essentially 225,000 voter registrations. And what it is claiming is that prior to December of last year, that North Carolina used an application form that did not inform voters that a driver's license or social security number was required. They claim that the state processed 225,000 voter registration applications without collecting this information. And as you might imagine, their remedy is essentially to purge 225,000 otherwise lawful voters because of what they say was a screw up in the form by the state, right? So they're not claiming the voters did anything wrong here. They're claiming the state did something wrong here. Again, this is going to be hotly contested on the facts, but it says a whole lot about the Republican National Committee, that in the first case, they want to demagogue an issue that involves almost no voters. And in the second, where they don't really have anything to claim negatively about the voters, they just want to kick people off the rolls. Kudos for the DNC for intervening in that second lawsuit. My law firm has represents some plaintiffs who are intervening in the first lawsuit, and we will see where those 2 cases go.
Marc, and what's also interesting about these cases is that Republicans have chosen to file their lawsuits in state court as opposed to federal court. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so they filed these cases in state court because the state courts have flipped at the state Supreme Court level, have flipped from a majority Democrat to a majority Republican. And I use those terms, those party identifiers on purpose because North Carolina Republicans in the state legislature mandated a few years ago that state Supreme Court justices run for election in partisan elections. Previously, they had been nonpartisan elections. And in one of these head-scratching moments, other than for sheer politics, the Republicans forced the justices to run with partisan identifiers. So it is now a 5-2 Republican court, and it has proved itself to be pretty hostile to voting rights in the rulings it's had so far. So, they have filed these cases in Wake County, which actually has a very reasonable set of trial judges. So I don't expect they're going to get very far at the trial court level in these cases. But I think they filed them in state court because they're going to try to quickly get these cases run up the flagpole to the state Supreme Court, where they think that given the partisan advantage they have on the bench, they may be able to get some purchase in these cases there.
The RNC in their own lawsuits has been saying that these problems have existed for a while now in North Carolina. Why are they suing now? Why file the lawsuit in August 2024, 2 months before a major general election, when by their own standards, these problems have allegedly existed for months, if not years?
Yeah. So, Judge Moskowitz, I hope you asked that question of them, right? Because I mean, all we ever hear about from Republicans and from a conservative U.S. Supreme Court is the so-called Purcell principle, or the idea that you can't wait until right before an election to bring election litigation because it can affect how voters, what their expectations are. It can make it harder for the administration of elections. And there's also something called latches, which is that you can't wait for a problem to develop without challenging it and then later claim that this problem got really bad. So the question of why Republicans should be allowed now, 2 months before the election, to prosecute these cases before the state courts to disenfranchise voters and to cause a whole lot of problem for the administration of elections is an excellent question. And that, as a procedural matter, should be enough to kill these lawsuits. I suspect, as I said, that this will be enough to kill these lawsuits, as well as probably the Republican National Committee doesn't understand the law. So they may be wrong on the merits as well. But it should be enough to kill these cases at the trial court level. The question is whether a hyper-partisan state Supreme Court, which, there have been indications of, jury's out, but there have been indications that this state Supreme Court is that way, given how they ruled in some other cases, whether they will look the other way or whether they also will uphold those principles now that, it is Republicans who are rushing in at the last minute.
We'll keep a close eye on North Carolina and keep y'all updated on these cases. Now, over in Michigan, Republicans have filed a new lawsuit in Wayne County, where Detroit is, saying that the county has hired many more Democratic poll workers than Republican poll workers.
Yeah, so the Republicans have been targeting Wayne County all the way back since the 2020 election, right? Wayne County, people need to remember, is the home county of Detroit. And a lot of the lying that Rudy Giuliani and others did in the post-election in 2020 was aimed at Wayne County. The first effort to get a Republican local election officials to refuse to certify an election result was in Wayne County. And that effort was spearheaded by the President of the United States himself, Donald Trump, who was sitting in the Oval Office calling these local election officials, urging them not to certify the election results in Wayne County. On the phone with him was Ronna McDaniel, the then chairwoman of the National Republican Party. So that's how seriously they were about this in 2020. Well, they haven't given up their attacks on Wayne County. The Republicans have been obsessed with how do they try to keep voting totals down in Detroit? How do they try to make it harder to vote in Detroit? How do they try to frustrate the ability for people to be able to cast their ballots? And they have seized now, again, another place where they've seized on this sort of at the last minute, after a lot of time went by, they have seized on the fact that there aren't Republican election inspectors, as they call them. These are just the election workers. There aren't that many of them. It's a overwhelmingly Democratic city, and there were only 310 Republican election workers compared to over 2,000 in the August primary. And they are now claiming that is the basis for a lawsuit. With God knows what remedy they have in mind. Well, God knows, and I know, and Paige, you know what their remedy is.
Right. Michigan law says that counties should try to have an equal number of Democratic and Republican poll workers, election inspectors, as they're called in Michigan, at each precinct. But the reality is that there are just a lot more Democrats in Wayne County in Detroit than Republicans.
Yeah, and there are a lot more Democrats who want to be local election workers. I mean, think about it. If you are a Republican in Wayne County, all you've heard for 4 years are lies. All you've heard for 4 years is that the Wayne County elections are corrupt and things were done wrong in Detroit and everything's rigged. And, all of the nonsense that Donald Trump has spewed, all of the hate and bile that the Republican National Committee has spread about Wayne County, of course, that's going to affect how many registered Republicans want to work at the polls in Wayne County. Why would they want to work there if they were told by their political party that it was this cesspool of corruption, that it was all rigged? And so what's happened is Republicans are reaping what they've sown, right? They are essentially now, they don't have enough people who want to work the polls. And I suspect, by the way, this is not just a Wayne County, Michigan problem. I mean, why would Republicans want to work the polls or work at absentee ballot, processing facilities, for example, in other states, right? The big lie has been so damaging to the health of our civic spirit in this country and to democracy in ways that people don't even think about it. We talk about it in terms of election deniers wanting to get into these offices, but we forget how much of a negative it has been for good people of both political parties, of Republicans in Wayne County, who might have before wanted to be part of this process, but who have now been so lied to and so vilified over time that they've gotten out. So that's the state, that's the reality that the Republicans have dug them holes. So now they filed this lawsuit and they claim that what they really want is more Republicans hired. But we'll wait and see. I have a deep-seated suspicion that what they really want is fewer polls. They just want fewer Democrats. They want there to be, if they can't find enough people, they say they submitted 600. Well, that's still not 2,000, right? That they're going to want to even this out by firing trained workers, firing volunteers who have gone through all of the proper procedures and vetting or whatever else they go through in Detroit. And it will lead to less well-administered elections, and it may lead to fewer polling places. So that's what I think they're up to here. And they're not going to get away with it.
Now in Michigan, election inspectors are selected either by applying directly to the county to be an election inspector or through a nomination list from a county of political parties. Like you said, the Wayne County GOP says that they submitted over 600 names to be Republican election inspectors for the August primary. But like we talked about in North Carolina, they would have known well before the August primary that they did not see the number of Republican poll workers that they wanted to be hired. They would have known before the August primary that there would be more Democratic poll workers than Republican poll workers. So why wait weeks after the primary to file this lawsuit? And again, just 2 months before the general election to try to fix an issue that they have now known about for months.
And again, it's because the Republicans don't want there to be smooth administration of elections generally. Now, they specifically don't want there to be smooth administration of elections in Detroit. Like, their hostility to Detroit is well known. I mean, Donald Trump lies about Detroit all the time. Donald Trump lies about a lot of major cities, but one of those is Detroit. So there's a genuine hostility there, and no one should think that this lawsuit is any effort to help Detroit run their elections. No one should think that this is any effort to help Detroit, have more election workers or people have more confidence in the outcome of elections. This is about as cynical a ploy of a lawsuit as we see. And believe me, at Democracy Docket, they see a lot of cynical ploys of lawsuits. I mean, they are tracking what now, Paige, over 700 lawsuits?
We're tracking over 800 lawsuits in our case database now. And like we just saw a group of Republican attorneys generals file a brief in the U.S. Supreme Court asking SCOTUS to rule that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is either unconstitutional or non-justiciable. So we're seeing a lot of craziness in courts from Republicans, from Republican lawmakers, Republican parties, Republican officials. It's madness.
Yeah. And my message to all of you is, Don't let this dissuade you from being active in our democracy. Don't let the Republican assault on democracy prevent you from making sure you are registered, your friends are registered, that you have a plan to vote, and obviously that you do vote, but also that you don't give up on the courts. The fact is, we talk a lot about these lawsuits, and we also try to make sure we talk about when these lawsuits fail, because more often than not, the courts, as imperfect as they are, as flawed as they can be, they are still more often than not protecting our democracy from the insanity and the vote suppression that we see on the other side. They are still standing up against the election deniers and the big lie advocates. And we need them to do that. And we need them to do that in 2024 and beyond. And one of the ways that you can stay informed in that is by making sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. It is free, and a link is in the show description in the notes. So please make sure you do that, because if you're not paying attention to what's happening in the courts, you're not paying attention to what's happening in democracy this November. Thanks again for watching this episode. Make sure, again, you are subscribed, and we'll see you next time.